Are you open to considering a tax increase on the
No.
in exchange?
No.
Did you listen? Were you here earlier? No, I'm not being a jerk. But have you read the CBO numbers or anything?
This is House Speaker Kevin McCarthy doing what he does best, acting like a whiny when reporters question his pledge to never raise taxes on the wealthy. And McCarthy saved some time in his condescending lecture to slam Democrats for raising the national debt.
When the Democrats came in, they spent $6 trillion. Now, I don't know if you're an economic major or whatever, but if you study Morton Friedman, he would tell you the only place that inflation is created is government. So that $6 trillion brought us inflation. So what did that do? Your money goes less. You have less money to spend. It doesn't go as far.
Now, I don't know if Kevin McCarthy has an economics degree or anything, but let's take a quick look at total spending by each presidential administration. And wow, would you believe Kevin McCarthy was actually wrong? By the way, watch my video explaining why a default would be absolutely catastrophic for the global economy here, and you'll understand why everyone should be caring about the debt ceiling. Unfortunately for us, Kevin McCarthy still has the power to drive our economy right off the cliff. If we use this thing called counting, we find that Donald Trump raised the national debt as much in 4 years as former President Barack Obama did in 8. And Biden's debt is on track to be smaller than both of his predecessors, and that includes both of Biden's big infrastructure bills. But Republicans in Congress are really struggling to understand all this debt and spending stuff. So Democrats invited one of their think tank nerds to try and smarten up the Freedom Caucus. And the actual budget experts couldn't be clearer about the harm Republicans are causing.
The size of the Bush tax cuts, their extensions, and the Trump tax cuts under current law over the next 30 years is 3.8% of GDP. Therefore, mathematically and unequivocally, without these tax cuts, debt would be declining as a percent of GDP, not rising. Second, spending is not to blame, despite the fact that it is rising. As I said, CBO's 2012 long-term budget outlook was the last time that debt was projected to decline indefinitely. And relative to CBO's 2012 projection, current spending projections are down, not up. On this graph,
Hey, nope, put that graph away, buddy. I'm the only one who gets to throw up charts on this show. That was Bobby Kogan, by the way, the Senior Director for Federal Budget Policy at the Center for American Progress. And Kogan had a message for Congress. For God's sake, tax the rich already.
A disproportionate share of the benefits from these tax cuts accrued to very rich Americans, profitable corporations, and wealthy heirs. Any discussion of how to address the deficits caused by these tax cuts should first look to the source. Thank you.
Now, this conversation is so timely because Kevin McCarthy just refused Joe Biden's request to close tax loopholes as part of a bigger debt deal. And you'd figure if anyone was serious about cutting government waste, the first place they'd look is closing all those obvious loopholes. Well, not Kevin McCarthy, because as Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen pointed out in a budget hearing on Wednesday, these loopholes overwhelmingly benefit the mega corporations and ultra-rich donors who keep the Republican Party running.
We keep hearing the House Republicans talk about reducing the deficit, but they're not willing to raise a penny in revenue from rich people, which just leads me to conclude this has nothing to do really with deficits and debt. It does have to do with, as some have said, trying to shrink government, but as we have more aging Americans, we have in continuing obligations, even if we stick with current benefits. So I'm hoping maybe we can dispel at least one myth, which is that the Trump tax cuts actually paid for themselves.
Now, where has this guy been the whole time? Because Van Hollen came out swinging against the myth of the fiscally conservative Republican and called out the extreme imbalances of the Trump tax cuts in particular. Here's more from Van Hollen.
And I just would like to get agreement on the point that the Trump tax cuts did not pay for themselves. In other words, they didn't raise more revenue over time.
Yes, Senator, you are correct. Federal revenues are lower than they would have been if not for the Trump tax cuts.
The Trump tax cuts did not pay for themselves.
I agree they did not pay for themselves, and they did not trickle down to employee earnings.
Mr. Hodge, did the Trump tax cuts pay for themselves?
The Tax Foundation modeled every iteration of what became the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from the beginning to the end, and at no time did our model ever predict that it would pay for itself.
And remember, the tax foundation was the witness Republicans asked for because they thought their testimony would be friendly. But if Democrats are ripping the mask off McCarthy's debt ceiling nonsense, we're still left with a bigger question. Does anyone actually care about this stuff? It's admittedly pretty hard to gauge public interest in things like the debt ceiling standoff. In the past, data has shown that voters only really care about debt crises after the government shuts down. That sounds pretty American to me. For now, Kevin McCarthy's coalition is holding firm, but the real risks of a default are now coming into focus, and some Republicans are urging McCarthy to negotiate in good faith. McCarthy is stuck with a bad hand. Time is running out for him to play it. And if you think that's all the GOP has been up to, take a look at this video. And as always, consider subscribing and leave a comment below so you can let me know what I should cover next.